The Falklands War officially began on the 2nd of April 1982, and it raged for 74 days. At the end of the conflict between Britain and Argentina, 255 British forces personnel, 649 Argentinians and 3 Falklanders were dead. It began over a long-standing row over sovereignty over the Falkland Islands, South Georgia and the South Sandwich Islands, all of which remain to this day self-governing British territories, some of our 15 or so remaining Crown dependencies. As the 30th anniversary of the war approaches, there have been some high-profile controversies over whether the islands should remain British or be handed over to Argentina, or indeed be given complete autonomy. Pop singers like Morrissey and the Hollywood actor Sean Penn have gone on record saying the islands belong to Argentina. But a poll this month in the Guardian newspaper revealed that some 61% of British voters say Britain should protect the Falklands so long as the islanders want protecting, no matter what the cost. It seems that just 32% believe Britain should be ready to negotiate with Argentina over a handover. And as the 30th anniversary of the conflict approaches, and with Prince William fresh from his routine posting there, some 61% of voters of Conservative, Labour and Liberal backgrounds say that Britain should continue to administer the islands. Now, to discuss this topic, I'm joined on the line by Andrei Kulikov, Senior Research Fellow at the Centre for British Studies at the Institute of Europe, Dr. Alistair Pinkerton, Lecturer in Geography and Geopolitics at Royal Holloway, University of London, here in the studio, and also in the studio, Dr. Abhijit Pandya, an international lawyer and blogger for the Daily Mail, and Nicholas Fuster, who's a student of international relations, who is from Argentina. I'll just ask you all to answer very briefly, first of all, and then we'll go on to the discussion. Dr. Pinkerton, Falklands, should they be British or not?
I think it's a very complicated question. Clearly, as somebody from Britain, somebody who's visited the Falkland Islands, all I can say is that the Falkland Islanders themselves would say absolutely yes, we are British, we wish to remain British for the foreseeable future.
Dr. Pandya, how do you feel?
The islands are British territory. I think anything to the contrary of that is basically not sound in international law, and is basically a sort of PR exercise for Argentinian politicians to get a one-up sort of in any sort of electoral campaign they wish to pursue.
Nicholas Fuster, presumably you feel differently.
I do indeed, yes, because I think that one thing is the rights of the islanders, and something else is a territory that is under the sea shelf of another country. They are not islands in the middle of nowhere. They belong to a sea, and the sea belongs to another country.
And Andrei Kulikov in Moscow, do you have an opinion, or is it does this seem like a very faraway struggle between Britain and Argentina?
Yes, I do, and I believe that the islands will remain British in foreseeable future, but finally they will be given an autonomy.
Okay, well, the history of the Falklands being squabbled over by not just Britain, but Britain and Argentina, and indeed France and Spain in years gone by, has been going on for some 400 years in total. Nicholas Fuster, you're an Argentinian. Why does Argentina want these scraps of rock in the middle of a very cold sea so much?
I will ask the question on the other side. I would say, why does England want this couple of rocks in the middle of nowhere and far and away from Britain? The islands, as I said before, belong to the sea shelf of Argentina. In the year 1828, there was an Argentine representation there. And there were ships of the United States and of the United Kingdom shipping. The sailors were sailing around, and they didn't want to pay the fee to work there. So, as they were much powerful than the local representation of the islands, they sent the governor, who was called Luis Maria Fernet. They sent him to Montevideo, and they destroyed all the archery there, and they settled down there. Since then, it was in 1833, as you may know, the United Kingdom has settled down in the islands, and since then they are developing the activities. So it's like, I think, 5 generations of British people there. So of course they are British, and they say they want to remain British, and it's fine. They have always been British.
So you can see a situation where the islanders remain British, but the territory is administered by Argentina? Or?
Definitely, yeah. I think that both governments should work together to find a solution, respecting the rights of the islanders.
Dr. Pandya, as a lawyer, what's your feeling on that? I mean, these colonial adventures seem very outdated to us now. What would be wrong with allowing that sort of arrangement to come into being?
Well, I think the premise there is fundamentally flawed and dangerous, which is that territorial annexation occurs by virtue of proximity. If you ran territorial control of countries on that basis, the world would be a far less safe place. And I think that what is here is basically what we have here is a retrospective claim by Argentina. One has to remember historically, of course, that Britain was there in 1690, before Argentina as a state even existed. But the problem today we have is in a post-UN period where territorial integrity must be sacrosanct, and also fair self-determination a key value in international law. To claim that something is a territory of yours simply because it's next door to you or near you, that's very worrying. A claim on that alone cannot have a solid foundation in law. It's not a sensible road to go down. I'm very concerned about the language used by the Argentine President Kirchner regarding the Falkland Islands. This is not language which helps international peace and security or supports the UN position.
On the line, Andrei Kulikov in Moscow. What's your position there as someone at the British Studies Institute? What is your position on territory not being given automatically to the country which lies closest to it?
Well, actually, the question is a complicated one, and it's quite difficult to transfer any territory from one country to another. It's a question of international prestige and economic benefits. We have issues of oil exploration near the islands, and we have the issue of international prestige both for Britain and Argentina in this equation. But in fact, I think that both countries will find the solution, and as far as I can see, this solution lies within economic development of the region, of the islands, and right now we have Argentina with Mercosur countries behind it, and we have Britain with its weight and international influence. So right now this question doesn't have a solution, but I believe that economic conditions of the islands will be improved over the next years, maybe decades, and then the islands will be given the right to form its own administration, and this solution, I believe, will be the best one.
Dr. Alistair Pinkerton from Royal Holloway, I think of all of us here, you're the only one who's spent time in the Falkland Islanders. Can you give us a perspective on what you found there and what you feel the Falkland Islanders themselves might wish for in the long term?
Well, I have to say, first of all, that Falkland Islanders are an incredibly hardy, resolved kind of bunch who just frankly get on with things and would rather actually just live their lives than worry about bigger political issues. But in all the time that I've spent there, in the research that I've done with Falkland Islanders, the one thing that comes through very clear is that they are British. They identify themselves as British. They see themselves as part of a broader network of kind of British influence around the world involving the Commonwealth. They see themselves as a profoundly modern kind of state. And I think that modernity is partly influenced by the development of the fishing industry. Of course, we now have oil industry as well, potentially developing. Tourism. They're an outward-looking people, but they would also say that they're not monocultural. They are a diverse population. One of the criticisms that's often levied against them, particularly from an Argentine perspective, is that Argentines aren't allowed to visit. And I think they would be very keen to point out that that is not the case, that there is active and healthy tourism between Argentina, largely using the cruise line industry. But they see themselves nonetheless, despite their relative proximity to Argentina, and I say relative because they are still 300 plus miles away from the Argentine coast. But nonetheless, in the modern world, with telecommunications as they are, they can remain in contact and they can remain culturally identifiable with the United Kingdom.
Is there any sense in which people there are exposed to Latin American culture? I mean, is there any sort of, presumably there are trade links, and there were in the past stronger links?
Yeah, sure. Before 1982, there was an active trade link, but with Argentina. Falkland Islanders would talk about going and visiting the Harrods department store that was in Buenos Aires, for a long time. They would buy their carpets and domestic goods in Argentina. Now, of course, post 1982, that link doesn't exist, and so there's now a much more active trade link with Chile, which is, I suppose, the most loyal country in South America to the Falkland Islanders' cause. But even those kind of trade links have become put under increasing pressure, not least because of Argentine threats to close down the air link with Santiago and Stanley. But as we know, famously, the price of eggs in Stanley has now peaked at over £1 per egg. Oranges are in short supply. People are desperate for fresh fruit because some of those traditional connections with Latin American ports, because of Argentine-backed sanctions, are forcing the islanders into a very difficult situation.
It was always, of course, strongly reported in the British press at the time of the war in 1982 that Argentina's real motive for invading Falklands was to take attention away from its own internal problems. And again, it's been said here in the press that President Kirchner is again using this as a sort of emotional flag-waving exercise. Nicholas Fuster, I mean, is this an emotional thing you feel about the Falkland Islands, or is it a matter of right for you that you feel that Argentina really has a strong legal and political desire to incorporate the islands?
I think it's both. I do think it's both. It's true that I'm so sorry because of the war. I'm so sorry that we had this military government. We Argentina as a country had many military governments. The last one was the worst one, the most terrible one, and the war was a way to try to let's speak about something else, and maybe we win, and if we win, then the militaries are going to be good and not bad. Well, we all know how it ended. This is something that the state should work for, not this government. I don't mind if this government, the next one, or the one before. I think that this is something that Argentina as a country should sort out. And it's the same with England. Margaret Thatcher had many problems by the times of the war, but England had a most powerful army than Argentina. That's why they won. And the same now for Cameron. If Cameron can keep the islands, it's going to be better for him, because he has many problems with NHS, students' relationship with Europe. Well, so I think that this is political. Of course, the one who wins is going to use it as a speech for a campaign.
Is it still important, Abhijit Pandya, is it still important for Britain to be seen to be strong enough to keep the Falklands, do you think?
But more importantly, from the self-determination issue and consistency in foreign policy, Britain at the moment backs Kosovan independence. And I think that is, for example, a far more difficult case of self-determination, because you have a sub-territorial unit within a larger state. And if you're saying that there is a case for identity there, I think you have to maintain the foreign policy consistency and say there's also one for the people of the Falkland Islands. It's clear that the people of the Falkland Islands want to be a part of Britain. It's historically been British territory, and I think that there's also a geopolitical angle here that one is able to protect and enforce effectively enforce the territorial integrity of the Falkland Islands despite of their distance. So I think those are all important values, and also above all of those things is the fact that interference with what is a territorially independent unit which wants to be a part of Britain is something that is contrary to the spirit of the United Nations Charter. I don't understand quite where Argentina wants to go with this. I don't see the point, long-term policy objective, by pursuing this. So it appears to be simply a sort of a PR exercise which hasn't been thought through at all.
What about the economic aspects of all this? It's been rumoured. Perhaps Andrei Kulikov in Moscow, you can give us your view. Is the potential oil industry, as Alistair Pinkerton mentioned earlier, is that something that's getting people more interested in the Falklands than they might otherwise be?
Yes, I think so. And economic interests are very important. And I think that the outcome of oil exploration and tourism might have some positive consequences in resolution of this dispute between Argentina and Britain.
Nicholas Fuster, representing Argentina as you are today by default. Can we get to the bottom of this? You said it is both a political question and an emotional connection. Do most people in Argentina really care?
Yes. Since we are studying at school, at elementary school, we are taught that the islands belong to Argentina. In every single map you see Islas Malvinas. In 1976, the United Nations asked both governments to sit down and negotiate this issue before the military government started in Argentina. England has never sit down and negotiate this.
Falkland Islanders would disagree with you about the role of the British government, particularly in potentially negotiating the future sovereignty of the Falkland Islands. Nicholas Ridley, who was a close ally of Margaret Thatcher just before 1982, flew to the Falkland Islands in order to discuss joint sovereignty arrangements. And even though Falkland Islanders said, no, do not dare negotiate on these terms, he came back and made a recommendation to the British government that joint sovereignty should be pursued. That was just a case of a few months before the invasion in 1982. And actually what, of course, has fundamentally changed things was the invasion. If anything, that has cemented British opinion that the Falkland Islanders should have a right to self-determination, that they should be protected from potentially aggressive neighbours. And I'm not saying that they are still necessarily aggressive in the same way, but if Argentina is looking to win friends and influence people, I would suggest that organising things like blockades of ports to British and Falkland Islands flagged vessels, limiting supplies of fresh fruit and vegetables to Falkland Islanders, threatening the integrity of air links to Chile and elsewhere, that's not the right way to go about it. Falkland Islanders are already sceptical about Argentina. In 1994, 78% of Falkland Islanders said, when interviewed for an opinion poll, which was interestingly backed and paid for by Argentine businessmen, they said that they wouldn't trust Argentina in any circumstances if sovereignty was ever negotiated. This is an issue of trust, I think. And at the moment, Falkland Islanders trust their connection with the United Kingdom. They still view Argentina with some suspicion. And I think if Argentina wants to try and press its claim further, it needs to go on an all-out public diplomacy campaign, not these kind of modern aggressive tactics, which, frankly, have the feel of old colonial strategies. Gunboat diplomacy, blocking ports. That's not the way to win the affections of the Falkland Islands population.
Do you know how bad it feels that you have another country forces on on a territory that belongs to you? Not because Argentina is the closest country to the islands, but because the islands are inside the sea shelf, and I think that this is important. You know how horrible it is that they are there, and there's no way for you to take it out. It's like someone living in a room of your house, and because that one is bigger or more powerful or whatever, there is no way for you to take them out. It's not nice at all.
If I may just come back on that point briefly, I am totally sensitive to the Argentine opinion. If I had been brought up looking at maps of the Faroe Islands, which, as we know, belong to Denmark, they're about 300 miles north of the United Kingdom mainland, and I had always seen those as being UK-marked territory. If I saw flags and maps that showed those islands as part of the coherent United Kingdom, of course, I would be distressed when I ultimately found out that they in fact belonged or were occupied by a different population. But I think what you have to remember is that there is an amazing cultural campaign that is exercised on the Argentine population. I've been to Argentina. I've seen the flags. I've seen the maps that always incorporate Las Malvinas as part of the broader Argentine state. Talk to Falkland Islanders, though. They have been there since 1833. Some of them are in their 9th, 10th generation, and it's not their fault that Argentine maps don't reflect that.
I'm not saying that it's their fault, but I'm just saying that they are not the local population. They have been taken there in an illegal way, and I'm saying, my personal opinion is, let's work together. I'm not saying that we have to kill them, we have to send them back to England. I'm not saying that. I'm saying let's work.
Be great relief by that.
But I mean, just to break in there, I mean, I'd like to bring in Dr. Pandya again. I mean, there is an emotional argument here. There is also a geographical argument. But the fact is, you've referred to it earlier, there are a lot of historical anomalies around the world, aren't there, in terms of territory, distance and proximity to Argentina, albeit within the continental shelf, as Nicholas Fuster points out, don't necessarily make the islands Argentine, do they?
Well, they don't. And I think also sovereignty, the issue of sovereignty from the continental shelf is not one which is concrete at all in international law. The basic starting point is one has one's internal waters. And those that is part of one's sovereignty, but those certainly do not extend anything like 250 miles, which is the distance from Argentina that the Falkland Islands are. So I think there's an extremely dubious basis upon which to push forward a claim for sovereignty. But the other thing is, going back on the school issue, I think it's appalling that Argentinian schools teach this. You know, if, for example, British schools today taught that the Republic of Ireland should technically still be a part of Britain, even though it isn't, and that was pumped into every British schoolboy and girl, and then everyone felt, oh God, you know, we shouldn't have given Ireland away during just before the second decade of the last century. That would be really, really an awful way of conducting one's education system. And that wouldn't actually make harmonious relationships between the Republic of Ireland and the United Kingdom. I think that's exactly what's happened here. I think it really is, there isn't really an issue here at all. It's one that's been created and pumped up by Argentina. And I think they need to stop telling their kids this, and I think they need to stop going on about it in their press.
Let me bring in Andrei Kulikov again. Looking at it from a Russian perspective, what do you think the legal future of the islands will be?
As I already told in the beginning, I think that the islanders will be given the right to form their own administration in the long run. It will be the example relevant to, I think, Gibraltar or Hong Kong.
I mean, Dr. Pinkerton, you mentioned the Faroe Islands, of course, islands that I'm quite familiar with. In fact, the islanders there very much feel they have a strong local identity. All right, they're a tiny community of only 50,000 odd people, but they think that the Faroes should be a completely autonomous nation because they have a strong local culture. Nicholas Fuster, do you accept that the islanders in Falklands, I mean, they're the only human beings who've been there for hundreds of years, that they regard it as their own, potentially, their own country?
Definitely. This is something that no one can deny, I think.
But I mean, as long as there are people of British descent who call themselves Falkland Islanders, you're saying that you sympathise with their position, so you wouldn't automatically make them Argentinian.
What I'm saying is, I think that the islands should be under Argentine government,
but remain in some sense the Falklands, who have their own identity.
You cannot destroy the culture of a town, and they have their own culture, which is getting bigger and bigger and stronger and stronger. And I think it's normal. I think it's fine. I mean, I think it's fine, and I think that it's bad. It's something that happens, and it's normal. That's the way it goes. So what I'm saying is, let's work together for these people to keep on living their lives as so far, you know. But the islands, I'm just saying that the islands should be not protected by another country, because they don't have to be protected against anything.
So do you think Argentina would be able to give some kind of binding legal guarantee to the islanders that Argentina would not interfere in their affairs?
This is my personal opinion. I'm not talking for the government or for the state of Argentina. I think that what you're saying should be or would be the best solution. But this is, again, my personal opinion. I think that we should respect the lives and the rights and the rights to keep on living as until now they've done, but under Argentine government.
Alistair Pinkerton, sadly we haven't got a Falkland Islander here with us, but having lived there and spent time there, how British are they? In fact, I mean, they are a very long way away, and they must have a local way of doing things.
Yeah, people often say that they're as British as fish and chips, and in a way that's true, but also in a way that doesn't really reflect the kind of the modern feel of Stanley and the Falkland Islands as a community. It harks back to kind of a bygone era. Most people who live there are of British extraction, one way or another. Many of the families who live there are from the original settlers in 1833. They're in their 9th or 10th or sometimes even 11th generation of being Falkland Islanders. And I do think it's also fair to say that they are just some kind of offshoot or colony of the United Kingdom. There is a distinct Falkland Islands identity. They identify themselves as Falkland Islanders. They have a very clear connection with the Falkland Islands as their homeland. And they're terribly proud of it. They may say we're British, but I think first and foremost, they would say we are Falkland Islanders. Coming back to Nicholas's point, as I said, 78% of Falkland Islanders just frankly don't trust Argentina to keep its promises, and I think that's one of the main stumbling blocks that Argentina is going to find going forward with this question. They want to remain British, and I think that's the way they will remain for the foreseeable future.
We don't have too much time left, but I'd like to ask you all briefly, Dr. Pandya, first of all, can Britain afford to keep administering and supporting the Falkland Islands? I mean, the original war cost billions, according to some estimates, and they're not giving an awful lot back to Britain at the moment. Wouldn't we be better off financially sending them over to be supported in some way by Argentina?
I think the 3 points I made earlier about consistency in foreign policy on self-determination, supporting the UN Charter, supporting the global idea of territorial integrity of territorial units and existing territorial security of the United Kingdom, all of those things are worth pursuing.
At any cost? At any price?
Well, not at the cost of, for example, the loss of territorial control over the United Kingdom itself, for example, in a time of war, but I think generally are worth a huge amount of cost. And I think it's important that Britain does, if it has to, police the surrounding waters and so on, those costs should be maintained by Britain. Because I think the idea of supporting the independence of the island, the idea of self-determination, is a really important, integral part of global peaceful relations. Something that we cannot afford to sort of detract from in any way. So I think it's worth a huge price. I think also, if you don't do this, you send a message out that a country that can keep claiming for year in, year out, as Argentina does, over a territory which it has dubious rights over, the people of that country don't want, people of the Falkland Islands don't want to be a part of Argentina. You set a general precedent down for this to happen in other parts of the world.
Nicholas, first I just want to ask you, as we wind up, I don't know Argentina, but I've always been told that British people who go there get a very warm reception, and that it's perhaps the country in South America with which Britain has most in common. Is that true? Is there an anti-British sentiment at all in Argentina?
I would say no, personally, because I have many English friends, because I've chosen London as a place to live. Of course, there is a feeling of if you name Britain or United Kingdom, of course people will think in the Malvinas. I think it's the same here. Of course, not everyone are going to say, "Oh yeah, you're from Argentina, the war and 1982." Of course not. And so I think that if you're English or if you're German, if you're French or whatever, you're going to be welcome. And people in Argentina are getting used to receive tourists and to treat them well, because this is the way it should be.
Okay, well, I think we probably all agree that we don't want to see conflict break out again. But for now, Nicholas Fuster, Dr. Abhijit Pandya, Dr. Alistair Pinkerton, and Andrei Kulikov in Moscow, thank you all for joining us here today on The Voice of Russia, talking about the Falkland Islands. Moscow, do you have an opinion, or is it? Does this seem like a very faraway struggle between Britain and Argentina?
Yes, I do, and I believe that the islands will remain British in foreseeable future, but finally they will be given an autonomy.
Okay, well, the history of the Falklands being squabbled over by not just Britain, but Britain and Argentina, and indeed France and Spain in years gone by, has been going on for some 400 years in total. Nicholas Fuster, you're an Argentinian. Why does Argentina want these scraps of rock in the middle of a very cold sea so much?
I will ask the question on the other side. I would say, why does England want this couple of rocks in the middle of nowhere and far and away from
themselves? Would say absolutely yes. We are British. We wish to remain British for the foreseeable future.
Dr. Pandya, how do you feel?
The islands are British territory. I think anything to the contrary of that is basically not sound in international law, and is basically a sort of PR exercise for Argentinian politicians to get a one-up sort of in any sort of electoral campaign they wish to pursue.
Nicholas Fuster, presumably you feel differently.
I do indeed, yes. Because I think that one thing is the rights of the islanders, and something else is the territory that is under the sea shelf of another country. They are not islands in the middle of nowhere. They belong to a sea, and the sea belongs to another country.
And Andrei Kulikov in The Falklands War officially began on the 2nd of April 1982, and it raged for 74 days. At the end of the conflict between Britain and Argentina, 255 British forces personnel, 649 Argentinians and 3 Falklanders were dead. It began over a long-standing row over sovereignty over the Falkland Islands, South Georgia and the South Sandwich Islands, all of which remain to this day self-governing British territories, some of our 15 or so remaining Crown dependencies. As the 30th anniversary of the war approaches, there have been some high-profile controversies over whether the islands should remain British or be handed over to Argentina, or indeed be... I'm joined on the line by Andrei Kulikov, Senior Research Fellow at the Centre for British Studies at the Institute of Europe, Dr. Alistair Pinkerton, Lecturer in Geography and Geopolitics at Royal Holloway, University of London, here in the studio, and also in the studio, Dr. Abhijit Pandya, an international lawyer and blogger for the Daily Mail, and Nicholas Fuster, who's a student of international relations, who is from Argentina. I'll just ask you all to answer very briefly, first of all, and then we'll go on to the discussion. Dr. Pinkerton, Falklands, should they be British or not?
I think it's a very complicated question. Clearly, as somebody from Britain, and somebody who's visited the Falkland Islands, all I can say is that the Falkland Islanders
given complete autonomy. Pop singers like Morrissey and the Hollywood actor Sean Penn have gone on record saying the islands belong to Argentina. But a poll this month in the Guardian newspaper revealed that some 61% of British voters say Britain should protect the Falklands so long as the islanders want protecting, no matter what the cost. It seems that just 32% believe Britain should be ready to negotiate with Argentina over a handover. And as the 30th anniversary of the conflict approaches, and with Prince William fresh from his routine posting there, some 61% of voters of Conservative, Labour and Liberal backgrounds say that Britain should continue to administer the islands. Now, to discuss this topic,